How's your English? It is good, eh? Look, the reason we're down here, we want to talk to you for a couple of days. Talk to you about a bunch of things. You're good with that? So I guess we're the first Canadians you've seen in a while?
Canadian.
Yeah?
Finally.
Yeah.
Can I have my cuffs off or no?
Pardon me?
Cuffs, handcuffs.
Yeah. You know, I don't see any reason why not. Do you want to put it?
Yeah, you usually take that.
Pardon me?
Out for the sandwich.
Yeah, are you hungry right now?
Have you eaten?
No.
No?
You sure?
You want some Subway?
Yeah.
All right. All right, yeah, might as well feed you before it goes
So take the
Been requesting that Canadian government for a long time ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's not as easy as it can be, you know.
I'm actually very happy it's not.
I think the first element that comes up that is probably very important is the fact that he was so excited, so hopeful in even in his body language when he hears about Canadians. And I think probably Omar is under the impression that these are people from the diplomatic corps of Canada, and they're there to find out about his situation and to help him. So it's perfectly legitimate that he would feel so happy and so excited about it.
One of the worst things within being held as a prisoner in Guantanamo is that you become sometimes so isolated, so frustrated, so separated that you become trusting and trust in your interrogators. And when they happen to come from your country, you have a feeling of elation that finally somebody's going to come along and advocate on your behalf.
Do you want a Coke over? I got a turkey sub there.
Thanks.
All right. Well, you're probably aware of the kind of things we're interested in, but mostly we'd like you to just start telling us from the very beginning, from your earliest memory about your life. And probably stuff you've been over 100 times before, but you haven't been over it with us, and so we'd like to hear it. We're very interested in you. We're very interested in a lot of you. So, do you want to eat first? Yeah, why don't you have something to eat?
Don't you go?
I was Director General of what is known as Consular Affairs, and that's the group of people in foreign affairs that look after Canadians who are in difficulty in foreign countries. On September the 9th, 2002, the American government sent us notice that they had captured a Canadian in Afghanistan. They didn't identify him in their communication, and for other sources, I guess, we assumed that this was Omar that had been captured by the American forces. And so when we got that information, I think 2 or 3 days later, I sat down and instructed our embassy in Washington to go into the American authorities and seek additional information on this. We never did receive a written reply. The next we heard was the sense that Omar was at Guantanamo, which would have been early October, I think it was.
At that time, I had a meeting with Mr. Powell, who was coming up to Ottawa. That was a big issue in the fall of 2002. So basically my plea with Mr. Powell was, is he getting proper treatment? Is he going to get proper legal representation? Are you recognizing the fact that he was a minor, is covered by the International Convention that deals with youths? And that he will get proper treatment, and would we be able to get access to him? The answer of Mr. Powell's was, look, he killed a fine young American. He's gone to Guantanamo Bay. He'll be treated with the justice system, with a proper American justice, and that's all I'm prepared to talk about it.
The Americans at that point were not allowing any consular visits whatsoever to any government who had nationals in Guantanamo, the Brits or the Saudis or the Swedes or anybody.
If a Canadian was incarcerated in jail in Texas, there's no question we would have a right to access to that person. But they said, no, Guantanamo is not part of the United States. It's under different rules, and no, you can't have access.
But over time, the Americans said that they would allow non-consular foreign officials to go in.
Yeah, if any time you don't understand what I'm saying, or you want to clarify a bit, just don't hesitate to ask. And if I'm not getting what you're saying, you know, just a normal conversation. I don't want you to feel like you have to come up with an answer if you really don't know. So you just say, I don't know. Or if you know something for sure, say, I know it for sure. And if you just think something, then qualify it that way by just saying, I think so.
Subsequently, I discovered that people had gone down to interrogate Mr. Khadr, but that wasn't a consular access. That was other people that had nothing to do with the Foreign Affairs Department, and we were only given what information they wanted to give us.
In February 2003, the first delegation of Canadians went down to visit Omar, and part of that delegation was a senior agent with Canada's spy service, CSIS. He had been following the Khadr family for years.
So why don't we just start at the very beginning, and we'll get all your biodata out of the way first. That means your full name.
Omar Ahmed Khadr.
There was a foreign affairs representative that went down by the name of Jim Gould. The only reason that he was allowed was because he belonged to the intelligence section of foreign affairs. So he was seen as part of the intelligence mission.
Sorry, you pronounce your last name Khadr?
Khadr.
Khadr, okay. You got it, Khadr. Thank you.
Date of birth?
September 1986. 19th September.
And there was a third person, a woman with the CIA, who was a liaison officer. And before they went on their trip, they were taken to CIA headquarters and given instructions on what they could and couldn't do. And she accompanied them as a sort of escort, I guess.
Get them to...
Yeah.
This was Canadian agents participating in basically a joint venture to exploit this young man as a source of intelligence with the U.S. government.
The bottom line is that they're breaking the law in these videos because at the time, as everyone understood, these detainees were in a legal black hole, as the English Court of Appeal had put it. They had no ability to speak with a lawyer. They had no right to appear before a court. They couldn't bring a habeas corpus application. They hadn't been charged with anything, much less tried for anything. And it was obvious to everyone who looked at the situation, including the United Nations and by then some American courts, that this was unlawful.
And you were born in
Toronto, Canada.
Okay. Do you remember, or you don't remember, but did they ever tell you what hospital?
Actually, I didn't know I was born in Scarborough until I came here.
Okay.
I thought I was born in
Scarborough General?
I think so.
So, tell me about what you first remember and how you first found yourself leaving Canada.
The first thing I remember, Canada was my first grade.
Yeah.
I did it in Canada. It's not starting school. We went because my father's injury. So it was vacation in Canada.
Okay.
Omar's father, Ahmed Sayed Khader, was an Egyptian student who came to Ottawa to study his master's, became a Canadian citizen. During the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, he decided to go there as a charity worker. He set up various charities for orphans, some for women. At that point, Omar was very young, and he would bring his family back and forth between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Canada. They had this bizarre upbringing where they'd go back and forth.
And he met your mother while he was in Canada studying. And your mother, the El Samna family, are Palestinian, but from Egypt.
My grandmother's from Egypt. My grandfather's from Palestine.
And your father is an engineer, but how did your father come to get into the relief business, the aid business?
Once the Soviets withdrew, Ahmed Sayed Khader stayed in Afghanistan. He had met Osama bin Laden and other members of those who would eventually become Al-Qaeda's elite. And he then continued his charity worker, but in the early 90s, there were allegations that he also was starting to finance Al-Qaeda.
And how many orphans would be being helped out at that time? Any idea?
Shower, there was lots of kids, maybe 500 or something.
I guess maybe November of 1995, there had been a bombing at the Egyptian embassy in Islamabad, and I think something like 13 people were killed in that bombing. And shortly after that, the Pakistani authorities arrested Ahmed Khader and claimed that he had some responsibility for organizing that particular bombing. Shortly thereafter, the Pakistanis released Ahmed and he came back to Canada. And I think Ahmed spent some time in Toronto raising money and then went back to Afghanistan.
When you were growing up, what did you think about your father? Did you think he was a very important guy? No? Just thought he was an average? But a lot of people around him thought he was an important character, right?
To the Arabs or to the Americans?
Oh, to the Arabs.
I think so.
No? You think the Americans think he's an important guy? Why do you think that is?
See that he gives money to the training camps.
Yeah, what do you think about that? Don't think so? How did your father get along with the Taliban?
Doesn't have a problem. Doesn't have a problem with that.
He didn't, huh?
Yeah, some of the projects.
Your father had been involved with Afghanis before, though, right? And he was there during the jihad against the Russians. And at that time, who was his main contact? Did he ever talk about that? Was the Afghans? Did he ever mention about the Guladdin Hekmatyar? Or the Hizbi Islami guys? Never brought those guys up, right?
All that, but he didn't do anything with them at that time.
He didn't do anything with them at that time. So at that time, he was just basically, he had moved So you went and spent Eid. Now, can you say that again?
Yeah, we spent Eid, it was before Eid, 2 days.
Yeah.
We went to Kandahar. We made the Eid celebration in Kandahar.
Yeah.
With Osama.
With whom?
Osama.
Osama.
And we spent 1 week.
It's actually crazy, isn't it? It's just pretty normal. All the except.
So this was in 1997, and you spent the Ramadan Eid celebrations in Kandahar with and we're talking about Osama bin Laden, your father with his inside his camp. Was that at the farm, the compound? What was the relationship, did you know, between him and your father? They were friends? Now, when your father used to meet people, were you there, or were you invited into the meetings, or did he just like to talk to people by themselves?
All meetings for dinner or lunch.
For how long?
For dinner or lunch or something.
Yeah. Okay, and they would just talk about things. Did you ever listen in on what they were talking about?
Most of it was frontline. And stuff like Kabul.
Now by front line. When we talk about when we talk about the word Al Qaeda, you know that name, what does that mean to you?
It's an organization.
Okay. What kind of organization?
Terrorist organization.
Did you use that word ever in Afghanistan, or did you just start using it when you came here? Now, after the events of September the 11th in 1991, or 2001, sorry, your father decided to keep his family inside Afghanistan. Is that true? In Kabul?
After that, we went to Logar.
You went to Logar province? Well, you know what? I think I've asked you enough questions for today. You know? If that's okay with you folks.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. No, we got all day tomorrow, and on to more important matters. If we were going to pick up something to eat tomorrow, what would you like? McDonald's or Subway?
Anything. I'll take anything.
You want a milkshake or something? Okay, all right, all right, well, we'll pick up something. And then how about we get together tomorrow for a talk? All right?
Very happy to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. But you know what? I'm tired and I'm sweaty now.
You can't take the heat. It's terrible.
All right, man. I'll see you tomorrow, all right? Oh, I'm going to toss this out. You look tired. Okay, just brought you a burger. Very hot though. Ooh, what's happening? Pardon me?
I say something that's very important. It's very to say.
Okay, take your time and can you do me a favor today while we're talking? Just make sure you talk nice and loud so that I can keep that air conditioning on so we're cool.
Something that's good to say.
Don't have to be scared of anything. You must.
You see on day one that Omar is elated to see the Canadian officials, and that if he cooperates and is tells them what they want to hear, he's going to be able to leave Guantanamo. Day two, he realizes that's not true, and you see the effect on Omar of that sudden realization. They're not there to help him.
What are you scared to say?
I was really going to protect me.
Why don't you just tell us what it is you have to say?
Promise me you're going to protect me. The Americans.
From the Americans? Okay, what's going on with the Americans?
Promise me that you're going to protect me and protect me.
Well, we can't protect you if we don't know what it is that you have to say directly.
Promise me. You're going to protect me and protect me.
Well, the only thing I'll promise you is that I'll listen to you, and I'll talk to the Americans for you here.
You have to go.
Pardon me?
You have to go.
And after I go, then I'll listen to what, maybe I'll come back down and talk to you again. Make sure everything's all right. Tell me what's changed from yesterday to today.
That's very good to you.
Well, I'll tell you, there's not much we can do unless I know what you're talking about.
Well, everything I said to Americans was not right. I just said that because they tortured me very bad in Bagram. So I had to say what I said.
The worst treatment that Omar received was after he was first captured, when he was in Bagram. And we still don't know a lot about Bagram.
Bagram base was in Afghanistan. It's an American base. And most of us who ended up in Guantanamo Bay first went through Bagram.
I was already in prison there, and they received some new detainees, and he was one of them. Omar was injured really badly, and he had broken foot or ankle, and he was blind in one eye, and he had I think he had another bone break somewhere else, but I can't actually remember where. But he was in a real bad state. He couldn't walk, they brought him in on a stretcher. And yeah, they put him in the same cage as me.
The condition of Omar when I first met him was pretty bad off. Looking at him, you wouldn't think he was going to survive. He had a very large hole in his chest, large enough to fit a can of Copenhagen over top of it. He was covered in shrapnel from head to toe, which even months afterwards was still very prevalent. Through his skin, you could see the shrapnel in there.
When I met Omar in Bagram, the way that they treated him, because the rumor was that he'd been responsible or involved in the killing of an American soldier, his treatment was worse than anybody else's. Despite the fact that he was a child, despite the fact that he was terribly wounded, they made him, I remember, drag him out of his cell, chained up, make him stack up piles and piles of water crate bottles, only to throw them down onto the floor and make him do it again.
We were all so angry. Everyone was, you're talking less than a year after September 11th. The mindset of the average American soldier over there was hatred. We hated them.
I recall the day when Nate and I were in Guantanamo, and we realized that we needed an affidavit for the Supreme Court. And we sat down in this cell with him. And here he is chained to the floor, sitting on a seat. And we have now approaching a very, very fragile subject, his torture.
After about 2 weeks in the hospital, I was immediately taken to an interrogation room at a military camp in Bagram. During this first interrogation, the young blonde man would often scream at me if I did not give him the answers he wanted. Several times, he forced me to sit up on my stretcher, which caused me great pain due to my injuries. He did this several times to get me to answer his questions and give him the answers he wanted. It was clear that he was making me sit up because he knew that it hurt, and he wanted me to answer questions. I cried several times during the interrogation as a result of this treatment and pain. On some occasions, the interrogators brought barking dogs into the interrogation room while my head was covered with a bag. The bag was wrapped tightly around my neck, nearly choking me and making it hard to breathe. This terrified me. On other occasions, interrogators threw cold water on me. Several times, the soldiers tied my hands above my head to the door frame or chained them to the ceiling and made me stand like that for hours at a time. Because of my injuries, particularly the bullet wounds in my chest and shoulders, my hands could not be raised all the way above my head, but they would pull them up as high as they thought they could go, and then tie them there.
I knew his lead interrogator considered him a friend, and I personally never saw him cross the line of what was acceptable at Bagram. Unfortunately, though, what was acceptable at Bagram at that time was an outrage on human dignity. It was. I was not a nice person, and I did some very bad things. I became that monster that was written about me. I became that, and I embodied it. And unfortunately, I think that's going to come back to bite me in the ass. But you know, I have to own it. I have to say that I did these things. I have to admit that I took part in this. And
but Corsetti, of all people, treated Omar well, from what I understand. And the reason why is because although Corsetti may have been involved in some of those abuses, he recognized, at least in this case, in Omar's case, that you don't treat a child like this.
all I can say about him is that he was a kid. He was 15-year-old. He was a typical 15-year-old kid. Maybe you know, raised a little differently than most of us. But that's the child was still there. That's what was prevalent in him, was the child.
So everything you told the Americans was because they tortured you, and you had to say what you said? Okay. And what did you tell them that wasn't true?
Everything was not true.
Everything you told them is not true. What about what you told me yesterday? Was that true? No? What parts weren't true? Well, be more specific. Tell me what you told me yesterday that wasn't true.
I saw you yell, and it became
You don't know anything about him? So none of that part is true? They tortured you very badly in Bagram. Now, who have you been talking to since yesterday about how you were going to be interviewed today? Yes, you have. No, let's be honest with each other. I won't sit here and lie to you, and you don't sit there and lie to me. Who did you discuss this with last night? It's me. No, I'm not going to trust you. You don't tell me the truth.
You tell me all the story, what happened. And I told him, don't talk much with these people because they're not gonna let you go. Just quiet and let her go. Leave it in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Leave it in the hand of God, and that's it. Trust me and be strong. Because if you lie, they want more lie. If you say the truth, they're not gonna believe you. If you feel you show him you are weak, they're gonna be more stronger. And that's why they removed me, and they was very upset with me. They dragged me, they took me away. Because they listen inside the cells.
You're not gonna trust me.
No, I'm not gonna trust you if you don't tell me the truth.
My parents know I couldn't be.
Well, no, I
Yes, turn it off.
turn that off. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Here.
Just turn it off.
No, I mean, the fact of the matter
I'm my arms, I'm all old. He said it is healthy.
No.
He said it's healthy. I can't move my arms. I requested medical for a long time. He doesn't know anything about it.
No, I mean, they look like they're healing well to me. I'm not a doctor, but I think you're getting good medical care.
No, I'm not. You're not here.
This is exactly why, as an interrogator, you wouldn't want cameras in the interrogation room. We fought that off both in Bagram and at Abu Ghraib. We didn't want cameras in there because I'll say this. I mean, it looks, the treatment that he's getting is very harsh, but if I were still in intelligence, that's probably how I would conduct my interrogations. It's not pretty. It is a very cold and callous manner that you have to carry yourself in order to do this.
I lost my eyes. I lost my feet, everything.
No, you still have your eyes, and your feet are still at the end of your legs, Look, I want to take a few minutes. I want you to get yourself together, Relax a bit, have a bite to eat, and we'll start again. I understand this is stressful, but by using this as a strategy to talk to us, it's not going to be any more helpful. I mean.
No, this reminds me because once we were in the rec yard together, and he showed me his eye, in one of the cages, rec yard, and he said to me that he lost sight in his eye because he can see my eye was injured then, and then he said to me, and he spoke to me, and then he said, look, I can't see anything. You can see my eye from outside, but I can't see anything from my eye. Now he mentioned it here to the Canadian interrogator, and the Canadian said, no, you're all right, are you getting good medical care? Your eye is all right. He doesn't know what happened to him.
I mean, we've got a limited amount of time, and, we've heard this story before.
You don't care about me, that's what.
Well, I do care about you, but I want to talk to the honest Omer that I was talking to yesterday. I don't want to talk to this Omer.
It wasn't honest.
Yes, it was.
You see, I'm not gonna believe me.
Well, look me straight in the eyes and tell me that you're being honest.
I am being honest.
Or you can't even bear to look at me when you're saying that.
Why I can't bear to look at you?
Put your hand down.
No, you don't care about me.
It gets to the point where the only thing you want is for the pain to stop, or for the mistreatment to stop, or for the abuse. In this case, it's psychological abuse. There is absolutely no question about it. He will potentially break down. It will lead to total regression.
Okay, look, let's take a few minutes. Yeah, take a break. Have a little bit to eat before your hamburger gets killed. All right, relax a bit.
Nobody cares about me.
You're not, that's not true. People do care about you. Yeah, click on the fan, click it right up.
Put the fan on so you're cool.
Yeah.
Put your shirt back on.
Right back.
Take a few minutes, relax a bit.
Now he is really crying. You can see the room is empty. Nobody's in the room, and he's really crying. And this is something I never seen from him in prison ever. So now we've been locked up together maybe 3 years, 2 years in different camps, different cages. But you never seen him cry like this.
These interviews basically were a continuation of the torture that he was being subjected to.
When I saw this interrogation that had been published, one sentence really picked up, and that was, "Nobody cares about me." And I remember when I met Omar last before, which was in Bagram, that was the last time I saw Omar, and he said to me, "Nobody cares about me." And that remained with me that will remain with me forever. The pity that I felt for him, I've never felt for anyone that I saw during all the time in Guantanamo and Bagram.
I think I know where this room was, and I know how bad he feels when he's in that room. Hate to see him so sad, and I hate to see him feeling as hurt as he is. You know, I've spent a lot of time with this young man.
You know, we've never seen that kind of emotion in Omar before. He's never displayed that to us before, and seeing it in the video was a pretty difficult thing to see, frankly.
يا أمي.
You go to your mother when you feel you need care. You need someone to take you out of danger and just protect you. You know, when things get so difficult, you just go, you know, anybody, an adult, a man, a woman, at the end of the time when you're in hardship, you know that the only person in the world that you can go to and will not ask you for any reason, will not expect anything in return, but your mother. And
That's just made me feel like, you know, I wish I can give him my life. Then I wish he will understand that I wanted to help. I wanted to answer. It's just, I heard it so much later on in life. But
I understand that he was actually watched and observed during this segment by the interrogators for about approximately 16 minutes. And I believe that they were watching him to see if there was a chance for them to go back. See, and use the opportunity, if he was going to be sort of vulnerable, to actually continue the interrogation.
are you doing? What kind of a day is it going to be today? Are you going to spend some time and have a good talk, or are we going to... What do you think?
What changes here is immediately you see the difference in the layout of the room and the furnishing. He's on a couch that looks very much like sort of anybody's living room. After the huge regression that they produced in the previous one, they are sort of bringing him back, and they're bringing him, and this is all a demonstration of their power and control.
Look, are you hungry? Pardon me? You don't want to eat? Don't feel like eating? Do you want a Coke?
Maybe later.
All right.
The interrogators might be losing control of the situation because Omar is regaining his control and is regaining some of the elements of resistance that are still available to him, like saying no. If he says no, that's the end of it. Nobody can actually make him say yes. Or they could, again, in a situation of extreme torture, but what would be the value of that?
No, look, I was very disappointed yesterday. You know? But these things happen. We've only got a couple of days here, you and I, to speak. I think it's important that we try to get as much done as possible. You know? I think that, I think we made a really, really good start. And I was very proud of you. I was very proud of the way you behaved. You behaved like a man. You know, you were forthright and honest. And I think yesterday you got kind of upset and you were kind of worried about things, and maybe you were talking to somebody, but I mean, you and I we're both from the same area. We're both from Scarborough, you know, and I want to be able to go home and tell the government that you've been cooperating. My organization has spoken to your father on a number of opportunities, and he knows what we're about. And, you know, we both know that we have a job to do. He knows what we're looking into, but your father, in our mind, is a lost cause. You know, he's not going to come in and resume a normal life anywhere. He's committed to what he's doing, and you know, that was a choice he made.
He didn't do anything.
Pardon me?
He didn't do anything.
But what I do want to work on is I'm worried about your mother. She's out there right now. She doesn't have any ability to come back to Canada. Her passport's expired. Nobody knows how to get in contact with her. And I don't want, obviously, you know, she's a Canadian. Well, I don't want to see that for her. I particularly do not want to see that for your sisters or your little brother. Your situation is very different, and we both know why. But if I can go home and report to your service, or pardon me, to my service, that you're being as cooperative as you can, then that will bode very favorably on the way our government views you. And I understand that you can't change the past, but what you can do is change the future. What do you think, Omar? Well, we're not talking about you right now. What I want you to do is I want you to think and help me to get in touch with your sisters and your brothers so that we can get them back to Canada. Who are your mother's friends in Pakistan who we might be able to go to, who can at least get a message to her for us?
He wasn't there. He doesn't know. It's a year later. Even if he knew we were then, he wouldn't know a year later. He's telling them the truth.
Omar probably did not know anything if we're still alive. So how could he help them? How?
Look, we're not interested in getting anybody in any trouble. What we want to do is, I don't even care if we can't see them. All I need is a phone number or an address that we can send a message to and say, and give them instructions on how to come in to the Canadian mission and get a passport without getting arrested by the Pakistani authorities or getting shot by some trigger-happy bounty hunter. You know, that's what I'm interested in.
They're lying to him. I was almost always in touch with the embassy, and especially when they're talking about the passport, I went over and over and over again, requested the passport many times over, and they refused.
Does anybody, do you want to pop now or something? I'm getting kind of parched. Take a second, take a second and just think, pardon me? Are you hungry? Want a sandwich or something? Pardon me?
You don't eat?
Okay.
We'll get you a pop.
Let's get a pop. We'll be right back. But think about it, Omar. If there's anybody that you can think of who would be you know, somebody who could sort of help us out in this one.
Still gonna be locked up, so we'll take your hands off as soon as you come. Which way are you praying? That way, right? No, well, then go down. Okay. That way?
One of the most memorable sights of Omar, for me, was to watch him reading the Quran. And we weren't allowed to raise our voices at all. In fact, we weren't allowed to talk, as I said. But with the Quran, sometimes you could get away with a little bit of melodic recitation. So I remember Omar's voice, particularly in a closed warehouse environment with the voice echoes. It was amazing. It was beautiful to hear his voice. It was one of the most uplifting things, because you knew when he was reading the Quran that he had some peace and tranquility in his heart. And whilst as long as he was doing that, it showed, and you could hear that in his voice.
I remember him when it's really, really late at night in the dark. I can hear his voice. He had a very beautiful voice, and he used to sing. And his songs were so beautiful and at the same time very sad. And you can hear him, you know, he mentioned his father in his songs, and he was calling it as if he was speaking to his father. And it was one of the moving things that I remember in Camp Fire.
We should talk about religion sometimes, but majority of the times we should talk about films. Me and my two friends used to go to interrogation every Sunday without fail, and we used to watch a movie. That because we was leaving towards the end, and we would come back, and I would spend about 2-3 hours with him, telling him about the film. So we watched James Bond there, Tomorrow Never Dies, or something like that film. We watched Harry Potter in Guantanamo. We watched quite a few films in Guantanamo. So every time I would come back, we would tell him, we would describe the whole film to him, which takes about 2-3 hours, and you have to name every character, and this person said this person said that, and we would stay awake till 2, sometimes in the morning, 3 in the morning, just talking about films.
There you go, you done? There you go, boss. Oh. Alright. So, everybody's back and... Jesus, on here. Have you thought at all about what we discussed earlier? Tell me what you're thinking. And what are you going to do on that day? Where's home? Canada? You want to go back to Canada? Well, there's not anything I can do about that. I want to stay in Cuba with you. Can you help me with that? No? Weather's nice, there's no snow. Okay. What other interesting things do you want to tell me about? Well, that's difficult to say, eh? What I can tell you is it certainly won't hurt you to be fully cooperative. Pardon me?
They didn't do anything wrong to be here.
Okay. Why don't you tell me what happened to you during the past 3 or 4 months of your time in Afghanistan, so that we have that for our records.
In the months before Omar Khadr's capture, what we believe happened was that his father, Ahmed Syed Khadr, lent his son to some militants in the area to act as a translator for them. And during the month before he was captured, he trained with them, and that's where the video comes of him allegedly making these unexploded devices. He was with these Taliban-linked militants, and at that time the U.S. was working alongside the Northern Alliance to try and combat the Taliban. And what the Pentagon has claimed was that Omar Khadr was training with some of these militants to fight the U.S. at that time.
And when your dad left you or dropped you off with these people, what did he tell you you'd be doing with them?
Just told me just stay in this house until just finish my mother's care. Medical care. And she was going to come back, but then I'll go to him.
Why couldn't you go with them?
Maybe it's not safe or something.
But it doesn't make any sense that he would have just dropped you off with these guys, and by happenstance you'd be sitting there taking apart mines for an attack on the Americans.
It wasn't for the Americans.
Who were you going to attack?
Northern Lions.
You were going to attack Northern Lions? But you can see that's, I mean, is that something you always wanted to do? You know, then why would you go there?
I just told me safe there.
Because your father just told you. So, you find yourself in this house, and they're getting ready to attack the Northern Alliance. Like, what kind of weapons?
The rifles.
Rifles? Russian rifles or American?
Russian.
Okay. Did you have pistols as well? Hand grenades? Yeah. So essentially, it was fairly well armed house. How did the Americans, or how did the Afghans and the Americans find you?
On July 27th, 2002, the Americans got intelligence that there was a suspected al-Qaeda compound, and they surrounded that compound. The militants inside the compound began firing, throwing grenades, and a massive battle ensued.
So a firefight started. The Arabs shot at the Americans shot back, and at the end of the day, you were. Did you guys make a decision that you were going to fight until the end?
They made a decision.
They made a decision. What was it? What did they say, that there was nobody going to leave there, or and that you were all going to fight until you died? Did you want to do that, or did you believe in that when that happened? But you did it anyway, even though you were the last person alive. What made you do that?
I didn't do anything. I was in the house when fighting started. Didn't have any choice.
So the event sort of overtook you, and you had to, in your mind, react to that.
I didn't do anything. I had no choice.
Okay.
The Americans eventually called in air support and decimated the compound. They believed that everyone inside was dead, and an elite unit that included Delta Force officer Christopher Spear went in to see if there was anyone alive. At that time, a grenade was thrown.
In a largely fictitious story, first told by the Department of Defense in 2002, Omar was the lone survivor of a 4-hour bombardment of an al-Qaeda compound near coast Afghanistan. The story was that he waited in the rubble and then rose up, wielding a pistol and hand grenade, taking a group of U.S. soldiers by surprise and killing a medic before being shot in the chest. No part of this story is true, however, and the Omar Khadr it describes does not exist.
I was severely wounded in the battle where I was captured. I was shot at least twice in the back, at least once through my left shoulder, exiting through my left breast, and once under my right shoulder, exiting out of my upper right side. I was also struck with shrapnel in my left eye, and was wounded in my left thigh, knee, ankle, and foot. I believe I remained conscious after being wounded and captured. I remember being carried by my arms and legs to an area in the open where someone put some bandages on me. The soldiers were asking me questions about my identity. They then placed me on a wooden board and carried me into a helicopter. I lost consciousness during the trip in the helicopter. After I regained consciousness, after being unconscious for a week, the first soldier told me that I had killed an American with a hand grenade.
Well, you have to own your own responsibility.
It was my mistake being in the house and they shot, killed, or whatever.
Exactly.
Come here.
Being in the house was your first mistake.
That was my mistake. My father was in the house. Fighting with people.
So your father put you in this house. Well, all I know is that you go every day, you get up in the morning, and there's a young American who every morning doesn't get up. How do you think his family feels?
What's his problem? What he done wrong to be in this position? He kill American? How they prove they kill American? Who told him he kill American? Maybe he defended himself. But no one knows. They have no evidence, they have no proof.
Sergeant First Class Christopher Spear was a member of the Delta Force unit. He was trained as a medic. However, he was there as a Delta Force soldier. And that's an important distinction to make because a medic is a protected person of war. And under traditional laws of war, killing a medic is a war crime. And while Chris Spear was trained as a medic, he was there as part of this elite unit. The Delta Force unit is an elite counterterrorism unit that the U.S. doesn't even acknowledge exists. And one former member recently was quoted in the New York Times as saying something to the effect of, we don't issue search warrants. The Delta Force kills people that we want killed.
One of the big issues that we've been facing is getting disclosure from the Americans. Something as simple as the fact that when these planes flew over the compound Omar Khadr was in, they had cameras. Well, it just so happens those cameras have disappeared. And those cameras would have given us some bird's eye view of what took place.
There are photographs that I've tried to get out publicly, but because of the secrecy rules in Guantanamo, I've not been able to, that I think very clearly show that Omar Khadr could not have thrown the hand grenade that killed Christopher Spear.
What I was really happy to be able to bring to public were pictures that we knew existed, but they weren't released publicly. And what the pictures show is the aftermath of the firefight. This first photo was taken right after the firefight, and this area here was where one of the soldiers stood, thinking that maybe it was a trap door because the ground gave way under him. He was looking at this combatant who's killed, who's right here. When the debris was cleared, what it revealed was that it was actually the body of Omar Khadr, which is here. And this here is his head, and as you see, he's face down in the rubble. And that's one of his arms there. And you can see in this picture, too, the bullet holes that went in his back there. And the significance of this picture is that this is the time here where the Pentagon says he threw the grenade that fatally wounded Chris Spear.
Your best course of action, and this is all I can recommend to you, is you have to start realizing that complaining, whining, denying what happened is counterproductive. It's never going to help you from now. I mean, you've got to take ownership of what happened, take responsibility, and move on.
You're saying at 16 years old, they take responsibility.
Pardon me?
If you have a son 16 years old, I think you can take responsibility.
Well, if I had a son 16 years old and he went out and he got involved in a situation where he killed someone, I think I would take responsibility for him. Put him in the grave. You basically, you're old enough to do something, you're old enough to take responsibility for it.
If he did do it, which I think there is significant doubt as to if he did it, you can't hold a 15-year-old responsible for doing that under those circumstances. I would have done it. I would have done it if somebody came in and killed all my friends. I would have tossed a grenade at them. So it's very unfortunate what happened, but he's a 15-year-old child in a war zone.
That means, by definition, that he is a child soldier. And child soldiers are the subject for the United Nations of protection, of rehabilitation, and not of the same kind of treatment that would apply to those who commit those kinds of offenses when they are adults.
You want to tell us that you think could help us, you know what we're concerned about. You know that recently, or I'm sure that you're aware that recently Bin Laden has targeted Canada directly and said he's gonna strike out against them. Yeah. Well, you told me the other night that you wanted to do something to help us, to help your country. Well, now we've got, this guy who's out trying to hurt us. Is there anybody you know who might be in Canada or from Canada or on his way to Canada who may be trying to hurt us? Because information like that, one piece of information like that, could go a long way to helping you. And if we could bring something like that into the Canadian government, that would get you a lot of goodwill. Because there's nothing we value more than trying to save some lives. You understand what I'm saying? And I think you could do a lot to rehabilitate yourself if you could help us in that. You understand?
Letters from my grandmother.
Pardon me?
Letters.
Do I have any letters from your grandmother? No. No.
Send lots of letters. I have no answers on my letters.
Well, you'll get that through the, that'll have to be a Red Cross matter. But I mean, you have to put it in your mind who your real friends are. And your real friends aren't those guys behind that wire. Your real friends are the people in Canada who care about you.
As you know, Mr. Cotter is charged with extremely serious crimes. There is a legal process underway by American authorities. And Canada, as I say, Canada has sought assurances that Mr. Cotter, under our government, will be treated humanely, and we are monitoring those legal processes very carefully.
Since we took over this case, which is approximately 6.5 years ago, we have fought in every court there is. Supreme Court of the United States, Supreme Court of Canada, federal court system here, federal court system in the United States, and in the military commissions in Guantanamo Bay. And along the way, we have had absolutely no assistance from our governments.
Whether what Omar said is true or not true can never be determined until it's brought up in front of a court of law where the rules and the processes are recognized. He's been held without charge or trial, or when he was charged under the military commissions. That military commission process is completely illegal and not recognized by any country in the world as something they would have in their country, including the United States of America.
I will never have confidence in the military commissions, and that's not a function of some ideological issue or necessarily even distrust of the people that are responsible for the system. It goes back to the fundamental point that everyone's entitled to a fair trial. We know what fair trials are. We do them in the United States every day for terrorists in federal civilian courts. We know what fair trials in the military are. We do them in courts martial every day in the United States Armed Forces. The only reason the military commissions exist is because the government has evidence in these cases that it can't use in regular courts. And so, viewed from that perspective, this system will never, in my mind, be fair. It will never be appropriate because you are subjecting Omar, you're subjecting these detainees to a different level of justice, a substandard level of justice that, in Omar's case, the only reason he can be subjected to it is because he's not an American, because he's from Canada.
I think that the Canadian people need to look at themselves and figure out who they are. Because Stephen Harper has, he's not, there's been elections since Omar was captured. So ultimately the blame now lies on the Canadian people of how I, as a cold, callous son of a bitch, had more compassion for that boy than his own people.
L'honorable ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Omar Khadr fait face à de sérieuses accusations relativement à sa capture en Afghanistan. Et il fait face à des accusations comme meurtre en contravention du droit de guerre, tentative de meurtre en contravention du droit de la guerre, complot, appui substantiel au terrorisme et espionnage, Monsieur le Président. Ceci étant dit, Monsieur le Président...
And if they want to allow one of their citizens to be treated like this, then think about the precedent that sets for the future for you. Could be you. Who's America gonna say is our enemy next? you know.
I regret that we were not more aggressive in trying to get him back. But if I'd known then what I know now, we would have been far more aggressive. What we knew then was, here's a young man, he's been accused of killing an American soldier. We've been told that those are the facts. He's in American custody. He's being properly treated under American law, and he's being humanely treated in accordance with Red Cross rules. This by our best ally, a defensor of freedom around the world with an impeccable reputation. And we accepted it. And I said that in the House of Commons time and time over again, and I believed it when I said it. With historical hindsight, I now know things were differently. So would I have acted differently then if I knew it? Of course.
All governments who are member states of the United Nations have an obligation to cooperate for the promotion and protection of internationally guaranteed human rights standards. That means that if one state is engaged in violations of international human rights protections, and another state, even though it doesn't have effective custody in that case, is in any way participating in or complicit in, they share responsibility under international law.
The Government of Canada, under law, has a duty to protect Canadians. No ambiguity whatsoever, all Canadians. But the government's position is that in this area, there's something called Crown prerogative, which says in this area, the government can pick and choose who it's going to help. And once you start picking and choosing, you are discriminating. And today, you're discriminating against Muslims, or people from Syria, or people that you put turbans on, or a few years ago, of course, we discriminated against the Sikhs. We discriminated against Jews coming out of Nazi Germany, and you need absolute rules here so that there is no ambiguity who you're going to help. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian.
So we'll speak tomorrow, okay? Just relax here for a while. And we'll try to get by tomorrow if we have some time to see you. All right? Okay. I'll see what I can do. How you doing? Ooh. Good to see you. How you doing? I brought you some McDonald's. It might be a little warm, or because I just had to throw it in the microwave. There's no delivery here. How you doing today? Are you good? Why don't you have something to eat while it's still warm? Yeah, I'll turn that down. It's nice and cool in here now. That's it. I mean, let's just be honest with each other on this one time. I wouldn't mind if you just said, you know what, I'm not going to tell you anything about that. But I don't like it when you say, I don't know, or you just shrug your shoulders, because that leads me to believe that you do know, you're just not telling me. And if you don't know for certain, I'm pretty sure you're smart enough to have some very, very good theories as to what happened.
What's theories?
Theories is an idea, You didn't just fall off a turnip truck. You're a very bright young guy, and you see a lot, and you talk to a lot of people, and you've been in some very interesting places. And I think if you wanted to, you could probably tell us a lot of interesting things.
That's what I have.
Pardon me?
That's what I have. I told you about.
Yeah. like, when you told us that Sheikh Issa presided over Zainab's wedding.
Yeah, I think so.
And OBL was there. No?
There's lots of people.
But not him. Now, why are you wavering on this today?
I said that because I was scared.
Of what?
Torturing me.
Of torturing? Were we torturing you the other night?
Not you.
The sub was bad, but the,
I didn't know who you wanted.
Well, no, I don't know why or what happened that somehow you thought that, you know, you said too much and you decided to sort of change your, so were you lying to me then or are you lying to me now? Lying to me then. But how do I know? How do I know you're not lying to me now? I mean, you didn't lie to me then.
How do you know that I was lying down now?
Yeah, how would I know that?
So I admit that I was lying down.
Yeah, but this could be just another lie. Right now, Omar, it doesn't get any worse. You know, it's never going to get any worse for you now. But
it may get worse.
In what sense?
Get more torturing. Put in an isolated room. No stuff.
Get put in an isolated room with no stuff? That's, I mean, I wouldn't consider that to be torturing.
I don't think you can handle that for one night.
No? Well, I mean, fortunately, I'm not in a position where I have to, that has to be something I have to worry about. You know? I'm not here to change positions with you. And I'm not here to tell you what your life is about right now, because, you know, quite honestly, that doesn't apply to me, and it's a stupid game to get into anyway.
I think it's one of the most cruel things that you can possibly say to anybody who is in that kind of a predicament. He's really saying, you know what, you're the product of your circumstances, and I really don't have anything to do with it. So yes, we're both from Scarborough. You were a man, I'm a man. But you know what? When it comes to this, we're not equal. And he's proud in saying that. You see, I'm not in trouble. You're in trouble. And what happens to people who are in trouble? They can be put in detention. They can even be tortured. You see, I'm not saying that you were or that I would agree with that, but yes, that's one of the things that could happen to people who are in trouble. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about it.
I'm in my position, you're in your position, but I can tell you that you...
Why am I in my position?
Pardon me?
Why am I here?
Yeah, but we don't want to go through that again, do we? I mean, even yesterday you said that you were, you know, basically in there with a bunch of Afghanis and a few Arabs, you know, and ended up in a firefight against the Americans. Well, that's why you're here.
If I didn't fight anybody, why am I here?
If you didn't fight anybody?
Yeah, I'm sitting. If you saw me, I was sitting just on here. I came from over and shot me 3 bullets.
And you were sitting? How did that American end up getting so dead then?
There was 3 people. There was a fight zone.
So it was okay because it was a fight?
It's not me. I don't know who. Maybe.
Well, the three guys are sitting in the car, and they go and they rob a convenience store, and one of them shoots somebody. Everybody in the car is guilty of shooting that guy. That's the way the law works.
What intelligence value is there in asking a question like that? I mean, you know, is that some sort of question that's going to elicit some information that's going to be of use to the Canadian government? No, it's trying to get him to admit that he's guilty. So it is an attempt to interrogate Omar and to get him to admit something that can be used against him in a prosecution. And so it belies this whole theory of theirs that they're not there to assist the Americans in prosecuting Omar.
And not only that, the Canadian officials were aware when they were sharing information with the Americans from interrogating Omar Khadr, the death penalty was still on the table.
I have to go back and write a report on that? They're going to laugh at me because they're going to say, well, this guy's not cooperating. This guy's jerking your chain. He's wasting your time. He's intent on lying to you.
I'm not lying. If you were tortured like how I was tortured, you'd probably say more than what I said. You're not in my position. That's why you're just saying this.
Well, you're saying that like a robot. This is like a rehearsed speech. You know? If I wanted a rehearsed speech or a recording, I'd get a tape recorder and I'd play it.
I remember speaking to intelligence agents and seeing clearly that they wanted to tick off boxes and go back and tell their superiors that we got this information now. It doesn't mean that the information is actionable, that it's any good, that it's useful. It simply goes back and tells the people in charge that we're doing a good job. We can continue to receive the salaries and the payments that we're getting for this job and continue to have this this position that we have.
But when I look at that tape, I see the absolute callousness of the interrogators, but you also see the desperation. It's like the salesman whose job's on the line. He's got to sell a car or he's fired. And he's pleading to a young kid, give us something so we can take it back. And it's not something for him, for Omar's benefit, it's for the justification of that interrogator's job.
If you were bright, Omar, and I want you to think about this for a few minutes, if you're smart, tell me something that can help me, that can show my government that you're willing to help us against a group of people who are bent on doing bad things to us.
You want me to lie? How do you lie?
I don't want you to lie, I just want you to tell the truth.
That's why I told you the truth. You don't like the truth.
Well, you know, we're leaving early tomorrow morning, and this is your last kick at the cat. You know, so if you want to tell us something that you think that we might be able to use and something that's going to be truthful, we want to hear it. But if not, well, thank you very much for your time, but we've got other things to do.
Just want to hear whatever you want to hear.
I just want to hear whatever I want to hear. No, I don't. I want to hear the truth. You know, do you think I want to sit here and listen to people talk about things? Not really. I'd rather be down on the beach. You know, I'd rather go and get a boat and drive around, or I'd rather you know, go do something fun. But we're here on a Sunday to hear what you're saying. Is there anything you want to tell me before we wrap this up? Homer?
Don't care everything. You can't believe me.
I wish, you know, this was all a big mistake, but it's not. And I'm as sure of what I know as the sun comes up in the east in the morning and it sets in the west at night. You know? Anyway, Omer, thank you very much for your time. Ooh.
For my grandparents.
Pardon me?
For my grandparents.
Well, I can't arrange that.
Didn't do anything for me.
Pardon me?
Didn't do anything for me.
It wouldn't do anything for you?
It didn't do anything for me.
It didn't do anything to you.
We can't do anything for you. Only you can help yourself.
Okay. I am, yeah, I'm telling you, if you ever get the chance to speak with somebody like myself again, then I would think about your future, not thinking about being loyal to somebody who was never loyal to you.
It's going to be after a month, don't send it back in.
Pardon me?
It's going to be after a month, don't send it anybody.
All right, Omar. Take care. Omar.
When I speak about those things, I see those conditions, I relive my own memories. And it's easier for me to keep quiet and live a quiet life. But when you ask about Omar Khadr, I feel there is a duty that I should speak about him to make people know about his conditions and how he is living now in prison. I'm a law graduate, work as a lawyer now, human rights lawyer. I was subjected to imprisonment more than 5 years, about 6 years imprisonment in Guantanamo Bay, in Bagram. I was subjected to all kinds of torture. I lost the sight in my right eye by a guard pushing his fingers inside my eyes. Broken ribs, nose, as you can see, that I can't breathe properly because the nose was broken inside there. My finger was broken in Guantanamo Bay. So I was subjected to physical mistreatment, and obviously the psychological mistreatment is even worse. I was released in December 2007 without being charged of anything. After 6 years of imprisonment and torture, I was not charged of anything.
Wanted to speak out, and I hope this helps Omar, helps his case, helps him get freed, and help people understand the reality of what happens with this whole sort of autocratic Bush administration system. But I spent 3 years in incarceration. And I was released in 2005, back to Britain.
I was released from Guantanamo on the 9th of March 2004. I was going home and I knew that he's staying here, and it just didn't feel right. Because, he became like a brother to me. And it's like, you leave your brother in the pit and you're gonna get released. It doesn't feel good. So, he brought tears to my eyes, he brought tears to him, and but nothing we could do about it.
It's Omar like it's my son. I left son in Guantanamo. He's part of my family now. I born in Egypt, but I'm Australian citizen for a long time. I was kidnapped, sent to Egypt for torture for 6 months. Then take me back to Pakistan. Then send me to Bagram. Then they send me to Kandahar. Then take me to the end in Guantanamo for 3 years and a half.
I will never forget his case. I will never forget the individual, or what happened to him, or how I saw him. For me, his case epitomizes everything that is wrong in Guantanamo and the war on terror. I am director of the Organization for Human Rights Caged Prisoners. I was held in Guantanamo Bay for 2 years and in Bagram for 1 year between 2002 and 2005. In January 2005, I was released without charge, without explanation, without compensation, and have been living and working in the United Kingdom since.
I definitely feel a duty to do this. To your viewers, I would say look at your own kids, and that's what he was. He was a child. He was not a hardened terrorist. He wasn't.
I'm certainly a personally and philosophically conservative individual, but I've never found a contradiction or inconsistency between any of the things that I've had to do as a lawyer for Omar Khadr and my personal beliefs. I mean, conservatives believe in the rule of law. Conservatives believe in limited government. Conservatives believe in things like fair trials. And so those are the things that I've advocated for in my representation of Omar Khadr. So, you know, if I had a different detainee, different set of circumstances, there may be contradictions, as you call them, or conflicts, but with Omar Khadr, there are none.
There are many times I have thought about walking away from the Khadr case. It cost me thousands and thousands of my own savings, my family savings, for each and every venture we're involved with of Omar Khadr. I think I've spent $10,000 in the last month just even travel expenses to go to Guantanamo twice, etc. So I have walked the floor at times thinking about how I'm going to tell Omar that I can't represent him anymore. And when I think about that, I realize that I think about what he said to me after I persuaded him, when we first met him, to come out of his mind and join us in reality and talking to us. He said, "You will leave me. Everybody does." And so I'm caught. I'm doing a right thing. If we don't do it, who else is going to do it? And it's something that we can't walk away from.
I am touched by him, and I think has been treated unfairly, and I think that good people and good citizens of Canada and the United States should know about him and should speak up and advocate for him, and that they should urge the governments to give him the opportunity to have the best possible life that he can. And so I think his story should be told.
What's up, man? What you doing? Yeah, I get this. Is this a gator or a milk? Nice. We got your name, your tape on your name. What?
Uh,